At my son's wedding rehearsal, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, you should be grateful I even invited you." Then he handed me a bill, $48,000 printed on letterhead, with my name already listed as the payer. His mother, Linda, smiled and called it a small family contribution. They'd already used my credit card to pay for the hotel, the catering, the flowers, the band, everything. Apparently, I was funding my own humiliation. I didn't yell, I didn't even argue. I just nodded, smiled, and took another sip of coffee. Because while they thought I'd roll over and pay like always, they had no idea that I'd spent 30 years building systems that run on precision. And one of those systems was about to teach them what gratitude really means. It started a week earlier when a thick cream envelope arrived at my lakeside house in Seattle. I'd been retired for almost 5 years, living quietly after selling my engineering consulting firm. I spent my mornings fishing, reading, fixing the old Chevy I refused to replace. The wedding invitation was elegant white script, gold trim. Evan Harris and Olivia Miller. Fairmont Hotel, Ballroom, Sunday, June 23rd. My son hadn't called in months, so I assumed this was his way of announcing he was still alive. I looked at the RSVP card and noticed there was no return address for me, just, "Please confirm online." Even the wedding website password felt impersonal. Harris Miller, Luxury 2025. That word luxury told me everything I needed to know. 2 days later, Evan called out of the blue. "Dad, glad you got the invite," he said, his tone rehearsed. "There's something we should talk about, wedding logistics, family contribution and all that." I met him downtown for lunch at a restaurant I couldn't pronounce, all glass and linen. He showed up late in a tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful finance guy he wanted to be. "Glad you could make it," he said as if I were his client. When the check came, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was an invoice from the wedding planner already paid. My card number was printed at the bottom. "I figured it's easier this way," he said. "We used the card you gave Mom years ago. Don't worry, I'll handle the points." Linda leaned in, perfectly manicured, her second husband's Rolex glinting in the light. "Michael, you should be grateful," she said softly. "At least he invited you. He wants you to feel included." I stared at both of them, then back at the folder. "You used my card without asking." Evan chuckled. "It's just money, Dad. You'll get it back when the statement comes. Consider it a symbolic gift. You can afford it." That sentence hung in the air like a stain. "You can afford it?" The tone wasn't grateful, it was entitled. I folded the folder shut and said quietly, "You're right, I can afford it. But not the disrespect that comes with it." Evan rolled his eyes. "Dad, don't make this dramatic. You always overthink everything. It's just family." "No," I thought. "Family doesn't use you as a credit line." Back home that evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the lake outside, calm and gray. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account. $47,286 in new charges, all labeled Fairmont Seattle Wedding Services. I took a long breath, then smiled. If there was one thing 30 years in engineering had taught me, it was that every system, electrical or human, could be recalibrated. I called an old friend, Lylan Gwen, who worked at the bank. She'd started there years ago, fresh out of college, when I'd helped her land the job. "Mr. Harris," she said, surprised to hear from me. "It's been forever. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, brief and calm. "I'd like a scheduled freeze," I said. "On my main credit account, all linked cards and all digital payments, precisely at 8:15 p.m. this Sunday." Lila hesitated. "That's the night of the transaction you just authorized?" "Exactly," I said. "Timing is everything. Think of it as a test in accountability." She laughed nervously. "You've got something planned, don't you?" "Just a lesson in gratitude," I said. "Nothing illegal, just overdue." After the call, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and looked at the old family photo on the mantel. Evan at 10, smiling with grease on his face as we fixed the Chevy together. Back then, he'd said, "Dad, you always know how to fix things." Somewhere between that day and this one, he'd forgotten that fixing things sometimes means letting them break first. The next morning, Linda texted me a reminder to dress appropriately for the rehearsal dinner. "It's black tie," she wrote. "Evan doesn't want you in flannel this time." I almost laughed. The man who once wore hand-me-downs from Goodwill, now lecturing me on style. But I didn't reply. Silence, I've learned, can be louder than anger. That night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset over the lake, the sky turning copper and violet. I took out a small notebook, the one where I used to sketch designs for energy grids. Now it held a different kind of diagram, a plan built not from circuits, but from consequences. On one side, I wrote, "Trigger Sunday, 8:15 p.m. On the other, "Lesson respect cannot be bought." When I finished, I closed the notebook, set it on the table, and looked at my old wristwatch. The second hand ticked steadily like a countdown. The freeze request had gone through. The system was ready. Sunday would be his big day, and mine. My son once told me that gratitude was for people who needed help. That was the day I realized he'd never understood what real gratitude meant. When he was 10, he thanked me for fixing his bike. When he was 25, he thanked me for not embarrassing him at a company dinner. At 32, he thought using my credit card for his wedding was some kind of lesson in humility for me. Respect doesn't die in a single argument. It fades over years of small dismissals, each one chipping away at what used to hold a family together. 15 years earlier, Evan was a freshman at the University of Washington. I paid his full tuition, quietly proud that my work in construction and energy consulting had given him choices I never had. I never asked him to brag about it, but when I visited campus once, he introduced me to his friends as a contractor who builds solar panels, his tone flat and apologetic. I laughed it off, back then told myself kids were awkward about parents. But something in his eyes that day, embarrassment, maybe shame, stuck with me. It was the first time I realized he was already rewriting our story. Linda and I divorced not long after that. She'd grown tired of the slow, steady life I built and wanted something shinier. "You'll never understand ambition, Michael," she'd said, packing her things. "You build things. I build futures." When she remarried a real estate developer, she made sure Evan saw what luxury looked like: black cars, private dinners, vacations that needed hashtags. Somewhere in all that noise, he started to believe that wealth and gratitude were the same thing. The week after our lunch meeting, Evan sent me a text that said, "Remember Dad, rehearsal dinner's black tie. No plaid this time." I stared at the message for a long time, half amused, half sad. There was a time when he thought my flannel shirts made me look like a superhero. Now they made him nervous. I didn't reply. I just folded the phone shut and let silence do the talking. The next morning, I stopped by the coffee shop near the marina. My neighbor George, a retired machinist, waved from the corner booth. "Heard about the big wedding," he said. "You must be proud." I smiled. "Pride's a funny thing, George. It only works when both people can afford it." He chuckled. "Kids today think money grows on confidence." "Confidence without gratitude," I said, "is just arrogance in a nice suit." At home, I pulled an old fishing rod from the garage, the same one Evan used when he was little, the cork handle still dark from his fingerprints. I set it on the porch railing and just looked at it for a while. It reminded me that some lessons have to break before they can be repaired. My son had spent years chasing things that looked valuable but weren't built to last. I'd spent my life building things that looked simple but never failed. That afternoon, I drove downtown to the bank. Lila Nguyen met me in her office, her smile wide when she saw me. "Mr. Harris." "It's been years." "What brings you in?" I told her what had happened calmly, without bitterness. She listened, eyes widening slightly as I described the charges and the way my ex-wife had brushed it off. "I'd like to schedule a freeze," I said. Her brow furrowed. "You want to block the account?" "Temporarily," I replied. "On Sunday, 8:15 p.m., exact. All linked cards, including the secondary ones." She looked at me carefully. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "Not revenge," I said. "Just education." She smiled. "That's the calmest threat I've ever heard." "It's not a threat," I said. "It's a boundary." Before I left, she printed a confirmation slip. At the bottom, she'd written by hand, "System ready, 8:15 p.m. Sunday." I thanked her, folded the note, and slipped it into my wallet behind the photo of Evan as a child. 2 nights later, the phone buzzed again. "Another text from Evan Hotel. Might need your card again, Dad. Make sure it's clear. Don't want any delays." I stared at the screen, feeling the faint hum of irony. The man lecturing me about efficiency was the same boy who once glued his fingers together trying to fix a toy car. I almost replied, "Don't worry, son. Everything's running on schedule," but decided against it. Let him have his last few days of ignorance. Friday afternoon, the rehearsal dinner was less than 24 hours away. I drove by the Fairmont Hotel just to see what kind of empire my son had built on borrowed credit. Outside, workers carried crates of champagne and gold-trimmed floral arches through revolving doors. Inside, chandeliers glittered like diamonds waiting to crown the illusion. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, the sound of laughter, the smell of expensive perfume, and felt nothing but distance. Not anger, just clarity. That night, the lake was still reflecting the city lights like scattered stars. I poured a bourbon and opened my old notebook again. On the first page, I wrote 2 sentences. Lesson 1. Gratitude isn't about money. It's about awareness. Lesson 2. Awareness without consequence changes nothing. I closed the book and picked up my father's old pocket watch from the table. I'd had it cleaned years ago, but never wore it. It always reminded me that time was the only thing you couldn't rebuild. I wound it carefully until I heard that steady click, the rhythm of control returning. Outside, a loon called across the lake, long and low, the kind of sound that made you think about what lasts after the noise fades. At 10:32 p.m., my phone buzzed with an automated message. Scheduled freeze confirmed. Execution time Sunday, 8:15 p.m. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the tick of the watch in my hand. In 2 days, my son would make his grand speech about family and success, and I would sit quietly, just like always. Only this time, my silence would have a switch attached to it. At the rehearsal dinner, my son stood up, raised his glass, and said, "Here's to family, especially to those who finally learned how to contribute." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of laughter that lives between mockery and politeness, a sound I'd heard too many times from people who mistook restraint for weakness. I smiled and nodded, my expression calm. I'd learned a long time ago that real power doesn't interrupt. It waits. The rooftop restaurant looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. String lights, jazz trio, soft skyline glow from downtown Seattle. Linda floated through the tables in a gold dress, every hair in place, the perfect hostess. Her husband Thomas stood beside her like a trophy, all sharp jawline and expensive watch. When she spotted me near the bar, she smiled, that practiced smile she used to wear at charity galas. "Michael," she said, touching my arm as if it burned her. "You made it. Evan was worried you'd skip." "I wouldn't miss my own investment," I said. Her laugh was brittle. "Don't start, please. Let's make tonight pleasant." She leaned closer. "And try to enjoy yourself. It's a special night for him." Every night's special when someone else is paying, I said. She sighed, eyes rolling slightly, then glided away before I could say more. Across the room, Evan was surrounded by colleagues from Morgan Securities, his voice carrying easily over the clinking of glasses. Olivia stood beside him, beautiful and graceful, her hand resting on his arm. She caught my eye and offered a polite smile. She was trying, I thought. Probably still believed all this was just nervous energy before the wedding. She didn't know she was marrying a man who thought gratitude came with an invoice. The dinner began with soft music, the servers moving in perfect rhythm between tables. Evan gave a short speech about humble beginnings and the value of hard work. It might have been touching, if not for the sideways glance he threw at me when he said, "Humble." He raised his glass toward me, the light catching his cufflinks. To my dad, he said, who showed me what perseverance looks like, even if we chose very different paths. Polite laughter followed. My son's colleagues smiled the way people do when they're unsure whether something's a compliment or a dig. I lifted my glass and said quietly, "To different paths." Linda, sitting 2 seats down, added brightly, "Michael's always been a simple man. That's part of his charm." "Simplicity keeps life honest," I replied. The table fell silent for a beat before the jazz trio started up again. Olivia changed the subject quickly, asking about their honeymoon to Bali, but Evan couldn't resist. "Business class all the way," he said, grinning. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll put it on your points." He laughed and a few of his friends joined in. I took a sip of my wine and smiled. There was nothing left to defend. The fuse was already lit. Later I moved to the balcony overlooking the city. The wind off the Sound was cool clean. I lit a cigar I'd been saving for months, watching the tiny flame flare before the night swallowed it. My phone buzzed a message from Lila, system test successful. Scheduled freeze ready for Sunday, 8:15 p.m. Perfect. I typed back, "Thank you. Precision matters," then slipped the phone into my pocket. From behind me I heard Linda's voice. "Still smoking those awful things," I turned. "They last longer than some marriages." She crossed her arms. "You never learned when to stop pushing, and you never learned when to listen," I said. She hesitated, then softened just slightly. "He just wants your approval, Michael. Try to be supportive tomorrow. It's important to him." "Approval is earned," I said quietly. "Not requested." She looked away. "You always have to make everything sound like a sermon. Maybe because I spent too many years being ignored in the pews." She walked off without answering. I let her go. There was no point preaching to someone who thought love was measured in appearances. Inside, Evan was laughing again. Glass raised his friends circling him like satellites. I stepped back through the doors, just in time to hear one of them ask, "So your dad really built power plants?" Evan shrugged. "Something like that. He's old school. Manual labor, blue-collar values. He doesn't really get what we do." They laughed, and I felt a familiar warmth. Not anger, not shame, just confirmation. Nothing hurts once you've already accepted the truth. Patricia Wells, one of Evan's senior colleagues, approached the group smiling politely. "Your father's in the energy field," she asked me. Was I said, "Now I just work with what's left, gravity-electricity consequences?" She smiled uncertainly, not sure if I was joking. Evan rolled his eyes. "Dad likes to sound mysterious. Comes from reading too many repair manuals." I met Patricia's eyes, and yet everything I built still runs. She laughed half out of courtesy, then excused herself. Evan looked annoyed. "Why do you always have to make people uncomfortable? Because comfort teaches nothing," I said. As dessert arrived, Evan gave another short speech, this time thanking his mother for keeping him grounded. He glanced at me again, smiling. "And to my father for reminding me that staying humble doesn't mean staying small." It got another polite laugh. I raised my glass this time without smiling. "Glad to be of use," I said. Linda glared at me, whispering, "Michael, don't ruin this." "I'm not," I said. He already did. When the night finally ended, Evan approached me at the exit. "Don't forget, Dad, bring your card tomorrow. The hotel might need it again for incidentals." "I won't forget," I said. "Timing's everything." He grinned, assuming I was agreeing. "Good. Wouldn't want any surprises?" "No," I said, stepping past him. "Neither would I." Outside the city hummed below, cars streaming like veins of light. I walked slowly toward the parking lot, my reflection sliding along the glass windows beside me. Above, the restaurant's lights glowed warm and steady. In 2 nights, they'd go dark. I could already hear the silence that would follow. I stopped at the edge of the street, pulled out my watch, and wound it once. The click was sharp and satisfying. It had always been a simple mechanism: gears, tension, balance. Just like people. They only fail when they forget what keeps them running. By the time I reached my truck, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was patient. And patience, like electricity, works best when it's stored until it's time to flip the switch. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about timing. I wasn't planning to ruin my son's wedding just to give him a moment he'd never forget. The kind of moment that rewires your definition of gratitude. By Friday morning, everything was in motion. The card freeze, the electrical override, the timing lined up to the minute. When you've spent 3 decades designing systems that never fail, building one that's meant to collapse on cue is almost poetic. I woke up early, made coffee, and pulled out my old engineering notebook. For years, I'd drawn power grids, schematic plans, fault tolerance maps. Now I was sketching something different, a flow chart of human consequences. At the top, I wrote, "Input arrogance, output education." Below it, arrows connected charge card, activate freeze wedding blackout, and public accountability. I looked at the page and smiled. It felt like wiring karma. I called Carlos, an old friend from my years at Tacoma Energy. We hadn't talked much since I retired, but I knew he still handled maintenance for the Fairmont's electrical systems. "Carlos," I said, "I need a favor. You remember that emergency cutoff module we used for the expo back in '09? He laughed. "You mean the one that killed power for an entire exhibit hall?" "That's the one," I said. "Can you check if the Fairmont's backup grid still uses the same model?" He hesitated. "Why?" "Let's just say I want to make sure nothing burns out if there's a brief power interruption Sunday night." He chuckled. "Still the control freak, huh?" "Old habits," I said. "Let me know." 2 hours later, he called back. "Same model, still vulnerable to manual override, but only from the maintenance panel." I nodded. "Perfect. I don't need it off forever, just long enough for people to notice." He paused. "You're planning something, aren't you? Just an engineering experiment," I said. Testing human voltage. By afternoon, I met Lila Nguyen at the bank to finalize the freeze. She greeted me with her usual calm efficiency and a look that said she wanted to ask questions, but knew better. "Everything's ready," she said. "Sunday, 8:15 p.m. Sharp. All linked cards and digital payments will lock simultaneously." "Good," I said. She slid a paper across the desk. "There's one more thing. Your son requested an additional user account this week, $12,000 withdrawal for audio and lighting upgrades." I felt my pulse stay perfectly steady. "Let him spend," I said. "Some lessons require tuition." Lila smiled faintly. "You sure you're okay with this?" "Never better," I said. "You can't rebuild integrity until it breaks first." When I left the bank, Seattle was dressed in that soft, washed-out light it gets in early summer, bright but fragile. I drove past the Fairmont again. Trucks were unloading crates of white roses and gold stands. The lobby smelled of champagne and anticipation. Standing near the front desk was James Whitman, Olivia's father. He spotted me and approached with a polite nod. "Mr. Harris," he said. "Looks like our kids are getting their fairy tale." "Fairy tales usually come with a bill," I said. He chuckled. "I hear yours was quite the contribution." "Word travels fast," I said. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Off the record, Olivia's worried. Evan's been creative with his finances. He's hiding some debt. I don't think she knows the half of it." I met his gaze. "Then Sunday will be educational for everyone." James nodded slowly, then smiled. "You're not the average father of the groom. Neither is he the average son." That evening, Linda called. I could tell by her voice she'd been drinking a little, her social wine tone smooth but brittle. "Michael, we need to settle one last invoice," she said. "The restaurant for the after-party. Just $5,000. $5,000 for what wine, mostly? It's tradition." "Tradition used to mean earning your celebration," I said. "Don't be stubborn. It's his wedding. You should be proud." "I am proud," I said. "I'm just not blind." She sighed. "You always twist things into philosophy. Can't you just let him have this one day? I'm giving him exactly that," I said. "One day he'll never forget." There was silence on the line. "You're not planning anything stupid, are you?" I stopped doing stupid things when I stopped explaining myself. I hung up and walked out to the porch. The lake was glass smooth, the air heavy with the smell of cedar and rain. I sat down, opened my leather-bound notebook again, and reviewed every step of the plan. It wasn't revenge. It was a correction, a reset of balance. At the top of the page, I added one more line. Never teach through anger. Teach through consequence. Saturday morning, I stopped by my storage shed. The old Chevy sat there under a tarp, its hood speckled with dust. I lifted the cover and found the small toolkit Evan had used as a boy. The tools were rusted, but the handle of his old wrench still had the faint etching of his initials, E.H. I turned it over in my hand. It wasn't worth $1, but it felt heavier than any gold watch he'd ever wear. I placed it on the passenger seat of my truck. "You'll come with me," I said quietly. "For old time's sake." That night I went over every contingency. The credit freeze would lock at 8:15 p.m. sharp. Carlos's manual override would shut off the ballroom's lighting system for 10 minutes, simulating a power surge. Lila would send me confirmation texts as each step triggered. No harm, no chaos, just silence and exposure. The perfect engineering of justice. At 11:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Lila system synced. 8:15 p.m. confirmed. Carlos testing backup cut off now. Works flawlessly. I typed a single reply to both execute only on my signal. The next day would belong to Evan. The tux, the speeches, the performance of love and success. But the night that would belong to consequence. Before bed, I wound my father's pocket watch again and set it on the nightstand. I'd never worn it to a wedding before, but tomorrow felt like the right time. The engraved back caught the lamp's light, for every action a return. My father had given it to me when I graduated engineering school, saying, "Remember Michael's systems. Remember what you put into them." I smiled, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark, "So do sons." By Sunday evening, Seattle glowed like polished glass under a fading sun. The Fairmont's ballroom shimmered with white orchids, gold-rimmed glasses, and a $6,000 champagne fountain that looked ready to burst into song. Guests in black ties and silk gowns moved through the room as if they were extras in someone else's movie. My son stood at the center of it all. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect lie. He looked like a man who'd built everything on his own, but I knew every sparkle in that room was charged to my account. Linda greeted me near the entrance, her smile tight and camera-ready. "Michael, you look surprisingly put together," she said, scanning my navy suit like she was evaluating a product. "I try to meet the dress code," I said. "Wouldn't want to embarrass the brand." She laughed a little too loud. "Let's not do this tonight." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "That's the point." She patted my arm as if taming a pet. "Just smile when the photographer comes around." Then she walked off to greet the guests who mattered. The ballroom pulsed with soft jazz. Waiters glided past with trays of shrimp cocktails and champagne. I found my seat at a round table near the back, the one politely reserved for the father of the groom. The tag said, "Mr. Michael Harris, guest." Guest. Not father, not host, just guest. I smiled. Accuracy had finally arrived. At 6:05 p.m., the ceremony began. Olivia walked down the aisle, glowing, her face lit with something pure. When she reached Evan, he kissed her hand like he'd rehearsed it. The guests sighed. The string quartet swelled, and I couldn't help but think everything looks strong right before it collapses. During the cocktail hour, Evan held court near the bar, surrounded by his colleagues from Morgan Securities. "You wouldn't believe the last few weeks," he said, laughing. "We had to juggle 3 vendors, manage a dozen contracts. It's been chaos. But we made it happen. All self-funded, of course." I took a slow sip of my whiskey and looked around the room. Every chandelier, every rented wall of roses, every smiling face paid for with my so-called contribution. Across the floor, Olivia's father, James Whitman, approached holding a glass of scotch. "Quite a production," he said. "It's impressive," I admitted. "Expensive, too," he added with a knowing look. "I spoke to my accountant this morning. Your son's not exactly conservative with budgets. He gets that from his mother," I said. James chuckled. "Maybe tonight will be his lesson." "It will," I said. "Just not the one he expects." He gave me a curious glance, then raised his glass. "To fathers who build what sons think they own." When the reception started, Evan took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice warm and loud. "Thank you for being here to celebrate our future. Tonight is about success, gratitude, and family. Especially family who never stopped supporting us, even when they didn't always understand our vision." He looked right at me when he said that. People clapped. I clapped too slow and steady. Linda leaned over to a guest. "He gets his confidence from me," she whispered, but loud enough for me to hear. I didn't react. I just smiled at the irony that confidence without gratitude sounds like noise without melody. A waiter approached and refilled my glass. "Compliments of the groom," he said. "Of course," I murmured. "It's all on the same card anyway." As the night unfolded, the music grew louder, the laughter sharper. At one point, Olivia approached and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Harris," she said softly, "I know Evan can be intense. I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done." "You don't owe me thanks," I said. "Just promise me you'll remind him someday that gratitude isn't something you outsource." Her eyes softened. "I will." She didn't know it, but I believed her. She had the kind of grace that could survive the storm her husband was about to walk into. At 7:55, I checked my pocket watch. 20 minutes. My pulse stayed calm, slow, deliberate. I pulled my phone from my jacket and saw the message from Lila, waiting in bold letters, "System armed." Activation confirmed, 8:15 p.m. I typed back, "Copy that, hold steady." I slipped the phone away and looked around. Evan was laughing near the champagne fountain, bragging about their honeymoon. "First class all the way," he said. Dad insisted. Someone asked, "Your dad paid for the trip too." He grinned. Let's just say the old man knows how to give back. I turned toward the bar and set my glass down. The reflection of the chandeliers rippled across the whiskey's surface, like a current about to break. As the dinner service began, the lights dimmed for the first dance. Evan stood in the center of the room, microphone in hand. Before we begin, he said, "I want to thank a few people. My colleagues at Morgan who've taught me what real success looks like. My wife who taught me patience. And my father who taught me, well, the importance of showing up even when it's not his world." The laughter that followed was polite but pointed. I saw Olivia wince slightly. Even James looked down at his plate. I raised my glass and nodded, my expression unreadable. Then I looked at my watch again. 8:10. The music started. Couples filled the dance floor. Laughter spilled through the air again, warm and fake. The band shifted into a slow, jazzy version of At Last. Evan spun Olivia in a perfect circle under the lights, his smile wide and easy. I felt the faint vibration of my phone in my pocket, a calendar notification I'd set myself. 5 minutes. At 8:13, Evan looked toward me, smirking. "Dad, don't forget to tip the band," he shouted across the room. "It's your card." A few people laughed. Linda laughed too, hand on Thomas's arm. I smiled, lifted my glass, and said nothing. At 8:14, I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into place. The air seemed thicker, quieter. I reached into my jacket and brushed my thumb against the cold face of my watch. The second hand ticked with surgical precision. 8:15. The chandeliers above flickered once, twice, then everything went black. Gasps rippled through the room. The band fell silent mid-note. For the first time all evening, nobody was laughing. And in the stillness that followed, I heard the faintest sound, my phone vibrating again. Lila Freeze executed. All accounts locked. I leaned back in my chair, let the darkness settle, and whispered to myself, Lesson 1, never charge arrogance to someone else's balance. At exactly 8:15, the violinist hit the last note of Can't Help Falling in Love. The chandeliers flickered once, twice, and then the entire ballroom went dark. For half a second, no one moved. Then the collective sound of confusion filled the air. Gasps, whispers, a few nervous laughs. Somewhere near the bar, a waiter dropped a tray, and the crash echoed through the darkness. Someone said, "Did the lights just—" But before they could finish, the DJ's voice rang out from the booth, panicked. "System down." Payment declined. The music cut off. The champagne machine sputtered to silence, and every glowing screen registers lights. Soundboards went dead. Only the red glow of the emergency exit signs remained, painting everyone in blood-colored light. Linda was the first to speak. "Michael," she hissed across the table, "do something." "I already did," I said. Evan looked around, trying to keep his composure. "It's fine, just a power surge," he said, loudly, his voice slightly trembling. "The hotel will handle it." He turned toward the staff. "Fix it. Now." A manager ran up to him, pale. "Sir, the issue isn't electrical, it's payment authorization. The event account was just locked." "What?" Evan snapped. "That's impossible. It's my father's card." Across the room, the DJ shouted again. "Every terminal's frozen. We can't process anything. Even the bar's shut down." The crowd murmured. People turned in their seats, glancing from the dark chandeliers to Evan, then to me. I stayed seated, watching the chaos bloom in slow motion. Evan pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up his face. He typed furiously. "It's a mistake," he muttered. "I'll fix it." A minute later, he looked up, pale. "It says the account was frozen by the holder." "That's strange," I said. "The holder must have had a reason." He spun on me, eyes wide. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" "I stopped paying for other people's gratitude," I said quietly. The murmuring grew louder. A few guests exchanged knowing looks. Someone whispered, "Did he really use his dad's card?" Evan's jaw tightened. "This is humiliating," he said under his breath. I met his eyes. Humiliation is cheaper than ignorance. For a few seconds we just stared at each other, the air thick with something sharper than anger. Then the overhead lights flashed on for a split second before dying again. The generator should have kicked in, but it didn't. From the back of the room, Carlos's voice echoed faintly through a walkie-talkie power override. Successful. 10-minute shutdown, clean and contained. I almost smiled. The emergency lights glowed dimly now, just enough for people to make out shapes. Evan stormed toward the service hallway, shouting into his phone. "Get maintenance up here. We're paying for this place." "No," I said, rising from my chair. "You're not." He turned, his expression shifting from fury to disbelief. "You did this. You're trying to ruin my wedding. I'm giving you something you've never had." I said, "Perspective." Olivia approached, her voice trembling. "Evan, what's going on?" "Nothing," he snapped. "My dad's just teaching," I said. "Don't worry, Olivia. You'll be fine. This lesson isn't for you." The guests were silent now, listening. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. The only sound was the distant hum of the emergency lights. "Everyone relax," I said loud enough for all to hear. Just a brief pause in the celebration. "Consider it an intermission." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Evan's voice rose, desperate. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I said. "I'm observing it." "There's a difference." He clenched his fists. "You think this makes you powerful? Freezing a card, killing the lights." "No," I said, stepping closer. "It makes me accountable. Something you might try someday." From near the door, Linda's voice cracked. "Michael, stop this. You've made your point." I looked at her calmly. "I haven't made anything. I just stopped funding the illusion." Right on cue, the ballroom lights flickered back on. The chandeliers glowed again, but the room didn't feel bright anymore. The music didn't start back up. The laughter was gone. Every pair of eyes was fixed on us. Olivia's father, James Whitman, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I think everyone deserves to know what's happening." I nodded. Simple explanation. My son used my credit card to fund this wedding. Every flower, every bottle, every rented illusion. I simply turned it off. A collective inhale swept through the room. Olivia covered her mouth. James blinked, stunned. Evan's voice cracked. "You're lying. I could show you the charges," I said. "But I think everyone already knows the truth. The card's frozen." "The lights are proof," Olivia whispered. "Evan, please tell me you didn't." He shook his head wildly. "I was going to pay him back. I just needed time. That's what gratitude sounds like when it turns into debt," I said. The silence stretched. Then someone in the back muttered, "Guess the apple didn't fall far from the ATM." Laughter followed, nervous but real. Evan's face went red. "You think this is funny?" he shouted. "Do you all know who I am?" "Yes," I said. "And now they know who I am too." He looked at me, eyes wild. "You've humiliated me." "No," I said. "You humiliated yourself the moment you called theft a contribution." Linda buried her face in her hands. Olivia turned away. The crowd stayed still, caught between disbelief and fascination. After a moment, James cleared his throat. "I think this celebration is over," he said quietly. I nodded. "Not quite. One last toast." I raised my glass, still half full of whiskey. "To gratitude, the kind you can't fake. May we all learn what it costs before someone else pays the bill." No one clinked glasses. But every face stayed fixed on me as I drained the last sip. I set the glass down gently on the table and looked at my son one final time. His jaw was trembling, his eyes rimmed with anger and shame. "Dad," he said softly, "you've destroyed everything." "No, son," I said. I just stopped pretending it was worth keeping. As I turned to leave, the crowd parted. Behind me, I heard Evan's voice break into the microphone, his words echoing through the quiet room. "This is all fake, he's lying. None of this is real." But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. I walked through the hotel lobby into the cool night air, the sound of rain beginning to fall against the pavement. I checked my watch. 8:27. Perfect synchronization. For the first time in years, the system worked exactly as designed. When the lights came back on, every face in that ballroom looked different. The laughter was gone. The champagne had stopped flowing, and my son, my proud, untouchable son, looked suddenly very small. He stood frozen in the middle of the floor, surrounded by everything he thought he owned. Everything he'd charged, everything he'd built out of borrowed pride. The silence after humiliation is its own kind of storm. Guests whispered to each other, trying to piece together what they'd just seen. A few slipped quietly toward the exits. The string quartet sat still, their instruments resting in their laps, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. In the corner, Olivia was wiping away silent tears, mascara streaking across her cheek. Linda's face was pale, her lipstick trembling. Evan was the only one moving, pacing in tight, frantic circles, his voice cracking as he barked at staff and at no one in particular. "It's just a glitch," he shouted. "Some banking error." He turned toward the manager. "You'll get it fixed, right? Just reset it." The manager hesitated, glancing nervously in my direction. "Sir, it wasn't a system error. The freeze was authorized by the account holder." Evan spun toward me, eyes wild. "You did this?" I stood calmly, hands folded in front of me. I did what any responsible account holder would do when someone spends money they didn't earn. A few of the guests gasped. Patricia Wells, one of his senior colleagues from Morgan Securities, set down her drink and looked at him sharply. "Evan," she said, "did you really use your father's card for this entire event?" "It's none of your business," he snapped. Patricia looked at me instead. "Sir, I'm so sorry." I had no idea. I smiled slightly. "Don't be." He did exactly what he was taught, to take credit for other people's work. That line hit harder than I expected. The crowd went quiet again. Even the air seemed to pause. Evan's jaw tightened, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you're teaching me something? You just embarrassed me in front of my wife, my colleagues, everyone I know." "No," I said evenly. "You embarrassed yourself the day you stopped respecting where you came from." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then suddenly, he laughed a short, broken sound. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you? You couldn't stand that I made something of myself. You needed to remind everyone you're still the big man." I shook my head. "You still don't get it. This isn't about power, it's about responsibility. You don't inherit that, you earn it." Across the room, Olivia whispered something to her father. James Whitman stood up and cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris," he said carefully, "am I right in understanding you froze the account on purpose?" "That's right," I said. "I wanted my son to understand that gratitude isn't a transaction. You can't charge respect to someone else's balance and call it family." The murmurs started again. People whispering, nodding, shaking their heads. Some looked uncomfortable, others fascinated. Patricia Wells turned toward Evan. "I've known you for 2 years, and I never once heard you speak about your father with respect," she said. "Now I understand why." Evan stepped forward, his voice rising. "You all think this is funny. You think I'm some spoiled kid. You have no idea who you're talking to. You're talking to your landlord, actually. came a voice from the back. It was Harold Kent, a local journalist I recognized from a previous conference. He was smiling faintly. "Mr. Harris," he said, addressing me, "you're Michael Harris of Northwest Energy Consulting, correct?" I nodded once. "I thought so," he said. "Your company owns several commercial buildings downtown, doesn't it?" "That's right," I said, "including the one where Morgan Securities leases its offices." Patricia turned to Evan, her face draining of color. "Wait, what?" Evan blinked, stammering. That's impossible." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a simple white business card. I handed it to her. "Anderson Building 221, West 6th Street. Morgan Securities pays $2.3 million a year in rent. My signature's on the lease." She read the card slowly, her expression changing from confusion to realization. Then she looked at Evan with something close to disgust. "You've been mocking your own landlord for 2 years." The room erupted in low murmurs. Evan's face went chalk white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Olivia stared at him like she didn't recognize the man she'd married. Linda stepped forward, voice trembling. "Michael, why didn't you ever tell us?" I looked at her. "Because I didn't need to. I never built my worth around who was watching." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Patricia stepped closer to Evan. "You know what's funny?" she said quietly. "You've spent years pretending you were better than everyone else, better than him. But everything you bragged about tonight, every bit of status you claimed, sits on property owned by your father." Evan's hand shook. "You're lying." James Whitman spoke next, calm but firm. "Patricia, is that true?" She nodded. "I can confirm it. We've been negotiating that lease renewal for months." Evan turned toward me, his voice barely a whisper. "You planned this." "No," I said. "You did. I just stopped cleaning up after you." Linda looked between us, eyes glistening. "Michael, please stop. He's your son." "I know," I said. "That's why I let him fall instead of letting him rot." The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. The guests didn't move. Evan stood in the center of the room, trembling, his confidence stripped bare. Then Olivia took off her wedding ring and set it on the table. "I can't do this," she said softly. "I married a man I thought was proud, not a man who lived on borrowed honor." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said. "Not tonight." When she walked away, he looked at me again. "You've ruined my life." I sighed. "No, Evan, I just stopped paying for it." I turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard Patricia Wells say quietly, "I'll handle the lease discussion in the morning." Someone else whispered, "Unbelievable." As I reached the lobby, the air outside felt different, cooler, lighter, cleaner. I checked my pocket watch, 9:02 p.m. I'd designed entire power grids that took less precision. From somewhere behind me, I heard the faint echo of my son's voice calling my name. But I didn't turn around. Because some lessons only begin once the lights come back on. The Monday after the wedding, Seattle woke up to rain and headlines. Finance executive under investigation after wedding scandal. The story ran in 3 local papers and half a dozen blogs before noon. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee, Lila had already called. "It's everywhere, Mr. Harris," she said. "Someone leaked the footage from the blackout. People think it's poetic." I looked out across the lake, the surface rippling with soft rain. "Poetic," I repeated. "That's one word for it." The video had gone viral overnight, chandeliers dying, the DJ yelling, the crowd turning toward Evan. The captions wrote themselves, "When the groom's credit card fails, but it's his father's doing." Half the internet laughed. The other half debated whether I was a monster or a genius. I didn't care. The lesson had already done its work. By noon, Morgan Securities issued a statement. We do not tolerate misuse of client or family assets. Effective immediately, Evan Harris is suspended pending investigation. The words were polite, surgical, corporate. But I could read the subtext. You embarrassed us. You're done here. Lila texted me a few minutes later. Account investigation complete. All charges reversed. Balance restored. No further action required. I typed back, leave it that way. Justice doesn't need applause. That night, the news anchors spoke about a father's unconventional lesson in gratitude. Some called it cruel, others called it brilliant. I called it overdue. Meanwhile, Evan wasn't answering calls. Linda left me 3 voicemails, all variations of, "You've gone too far." But each one sounded weaker than the last, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. By Tuesday, Evan's accounts had been flagged for review. He'd been living on company perks for years, car condo expense reimbursements. The freeze meant everything stopped at once. No paycheck, no credit, no safety net. The man who once bragged about financial independence was suddenly dependent on apologies he didn't know how to give. I spent that morning fixing the porch railing outside my house, the lake still gray and cold. George from next door walked over holding a mug of coffee. "Saw the news," he said. "That your boy? That's him?" George nodded slowly. Hell of a way to teach a man manners. "Some lessons need more voltage," I said. The next day, I got another call from Lila. "Your son came by the bank," she said carefully. "He tried to access your accounts. I told him you'd have to approve it personally." "Good," I said. "Did he ask for money or forgiveness money?" she said. I sighed. "Then he's not ready yet." That evening, a new headline appeared. Morgan Securities executive terminated for conduct detrimental to client relations. They didn't name him, but everyone knew. Even the markets whispered. I turned off the television and poured a glass of bourbon. Silence had always been my favorite sound. By Thursday, the damage was complete. Evan's phone was disconnected. His wife had moved out. His name disappeared from the company website. And for the first time in years, my son had no audience left to impress. Linda showed up that afternoon, rain soaking her coat. She didn't bother knocking, just pushed the door open and stood dripping in the hallway. "He's broken," she said. "He's learning," I replied. She dropped her purse on the floor. "Michael, he's our son." "Yes," I said. "And sons eventually have to grow up." She took a shaky breath. "You could have warned him. You could have told him what you were planning." "I could have," I said. But then he would have learned nothing. He needed to feel the ground go out from under him to understand who was holding him up. Linda pressed her hand to her temple, eyes wet. "You always have to be the teacher, even now." "Someone has to be," I said quietly. "You spent years telling him he deserved everything. I just reminded him he doesn't." She looked at me for a long time, then whispered, "You proved your point. But at what cost?" I looked past her out the window at the rain sliding down the glass. "At the cost of illusion. It's cheaper than you think." She left without saying goodbye. The door clicked shut behind her like punctuation. The next morning, Lila sent another message. Investigation closed. No fraud detected. Evan's accounts reactivated under limited supervision. Limited supervision. I smiled. Even the bank understood the lesson better than my family did. That afternoon, a journalist named Harold Kent emailed me. He'd been at the wedding. "Mr. Mus Harris, I'd like to do a story about quiet accountability, how men like you teach through silence, not spectacle." I deleted the email. The story had already written itself. By Friday, the lake was still again. I sat on the porch with my coffee, the clouds breaking just enough for light to touch the water. I thought about my father, the man who'd once given me his pocket watch, and said, "Every system eventually balances if you're patient enough to let it." He'd been right. The system balanced. That evening, I got a text from James Whitman, saw the footage. "You did what every father wishes he could. When you're done cleaning up, call me. I've got a project that might interest you." I didn't reply. Some offers come too early. Some lessons take longer to settle. On Saturday morning, I drove downtown past Morgan Security's glass tower. Workers were removing Evan's name from the directory in the lobby. One man looked up as I walked by. "You here for the office clean-out?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just checking the wiring." The truth was, I wasn't there to watch him fall. I was there to make sure he could still stand afterward. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, the line was quiet for a moment. Then a familiar voice said, "Dad, I didn't say anything. I just listened." He started, then stopped. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," I said softly. "Start by listening instead." He didn't hang up. Neither did I. For a long time, the only sound was the rain, steady and rhythmic, washing the last bit of noise from what used to be pride. When the call finally ended, I looked down at the old pocket watch on my desk. The second hand ticked forward, calm and unhurried. Justice had never needed noise. It just needed time. They say every fall begins with one missed step. Evans began with a toast and ended with a termination letter. By Thursday morning, his office badge stopped working. By Friday, the bank had locked his personal accounts pending review. And by Sunday, he was living in a downtown condo filled with unpaid invoices, unopened bills, and the echo of his own voice yelling at no one. The man who once spoke in numbers and status updates now stared at walls that didn't answer back. He tried calling Linda first. She didn't pick up. Then he tried Olivia, but her phone went straight to voicemail. "Liv, it's me," he said into the silence. "We can fix this. My dad went too far, that's all. Call me." He waited for a reply that never came. When the call ended, he threw his phone onto the couch and sat there for a long time, staring at the blank television screen, like it might explain where his life had gone. The following Monday, he walked into Morgan Securities to plead his case. Security met him at the elevator. "I just need 5 minutes," he said. The guard shook his head. "You're no longer authorized access, sir." He tried to push past, but the guard didn't move. That's when he saw Patricia Wells step out of another elevator. Folders in hand, her eyes sharp but not cruel. "Evan," she said, "don't make this harder. I built this firm's client base," he snapped. "You built your career on your father's credit," she replied evenly. "Now you're paying the interest." The words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. He stood frozen as she walked past him, her perfume faint and clean, the sound of her heels fading into the hum of the lobby. That night, Evan went to Linda's house. She opened the door halfway, eyes wary. "Mom, please," he said. "I just need some cash until I can figure this out." She sighed. "Evan, you don't need cash. You need humility. Don't start," he said, rubbing his temples. "I'm trying to get back on my feet." "Your father was right," she said quietly. "You think every mistake can be paid off. Some debts don't take money." He clenched his fists. "He humiliated me in front of everyone. He gave you what you gave him," she said. "Disrespect." Only louder. Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked tired, older than he remembered. For the first time, Evan saw the lines around her eyes and realized his mother had spent half her life cleaning up the messes he and his father made. He wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. Instead, he turned away and muttered, "You both wanted this." Linda closed the door slowly. "No, Evan. We just stopped protecting you from yourself." 2 days later, he sat in a cafe with a local journalist, the same one who'd attended the wedding. The man introduced himself as Harold Kent. "You want to tell your side?" Harold asked. "People think your father's some kind of folk hero." Evan leaned forward. "He's manipulative. He wanted control. That's what this was about, not gratitude power." Harold jotted a note. "Did you have permission to use his card?" Evan hesitated. "He told me it was fine years ago. Did you ask him before the wedding?" Evan looked away. "It's family," it was implied. Harold's pen stopped. "Implied gratitude isn't the same as earned respect, son." The words landed like a hammer. When the article came out the next morning, the headline read, "When Gratitude Turns into Debt, the Fall of Evan Harris." He didn't even finish reading it. That night, he caught his reflection in the mirror and barely recognized himself. His hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow. He picked up an old photograph from the dresser, him and his dad on the lake, both grinning, a fishing rod between them. He remembered how proud he'd been when he caught his first trout, how his father had said, "Pay attention to the sound of what's breaking it, tells you how to fix it." He whispered the words out loud, testing them like they belonged to someone else. Pay attention to what's breaking. The condo was silent. Even the city outside felt distant, as if it had already forgotten his name. On Friday, he tried calling me. The first 2 calls went unanswered. On the third, I picked up. "Dad," he said softly, his voice rough, small. "I didn't speak. I need to talk," he said. "Please, talking is easy," I said finally. "Listening is harder. Which one are you ready for?" He hesitated. "Both, I think." "Then, meet me tomorrow. Same dock we used to fish at." The next morning, I drove down early. The fog hung low over the lake, soft and familiar. I brought 2 cups of coffee black, the way he hated it as a kid, but would drink now without complaint. When he arrived, his suit was gone, replaced by jeans and an old jacket. He looked smaller, quieter. He sat beside me without a word. The lake stretched out before us, perfectly still. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the gentle tap of water against the dock. Finally, he said, "I ruined everything." "No," I said. "You just found the floor." He laughed weakly. "You could have warned me." "I did," I said. "You just weren't listening." He looked down at his hands. "I thought gratitude meant paying you back." "Gratitude means recognizing what you already owe," I said, "and not pretending the balance was ever yours." He nodded slowly. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't a transaction," I said. "It's a direction. Start walking." He stared out over the lake. "I don't know where to start." "Then start here," I said. "Start by sitting still." We stayed like that for a while, 2 quiet shapes against the morning fog. For the first time in years, he didn't try to fill the silence. That was how I knew he was listening. When I drove home later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from Lila. Investigation cleared. Evan's accounts reinstated under monitoring. I texted back, "Let it stand. He's learning what interest really means." That night, I took the old pocket watch from my desk and wound it once. The second hand ticked softly, steady, and sure. I thought about my son sitting on that dock watching the water move. Every man breaks differently. The lucky ones break just enough to rebuild. When I was 12, my father told me that silence was the most powerful tool a man could own. Anyone can shout, he'd said, but the man who can stay quiet long enough to listen, that's the one who ends up running the room. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Standing on the old dock with my son beside me, I realized silence had finally done its job. It had stripped away the noise, the ego, the excuses. What was left was truth, raw and uncomfortable but real. Evan sat beside me, shoulders hunched, a paper cup of coffee trembling in his hands. He'd barely slept. His voice came out small. "I've lost everything." I stared at the water. "Then you finally have room to build something worth keeping." He let out a bitter laugh. "You always have a line ready, don't you?" I smiled faintly. "It's not a line, son. It's what 30 years of mistakes sound like when they grow up." For a while, the only sound was the lapping of the water against the dock. A heron glided across the lake, wings stretched wide, quiet as breath. The air smelled like cedar and rain. It was the same lake where I'd taught Evan to fish when he was 6. He'd cried the first time his line snapped. Back then, I'd handed him a new hook and said, "You fix what breaks or it stays broken." It felt like we were still standing in that moment, except this time the broken thing wasn't a fishing line. "I don't know where to start," he said finally. "You start by sitting still," I said. "By letting the silence fill the space you used to cover with excuses." He looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "I was angry at you for so long. I thought you just liked making me feel small." "You were small," I said softly. "But not because I wanted it. Because you kept measuring yourself against what you thought made men powerful." He dropped his gaze. "Money." "Money," I echoed. "Titles, approval, all the noise. Gratitude doesn't live in noise." He nodded slowly, staring at the ripples on the surface. "I thought gratitude was something you showed after someone did you a favor." "No," I said. "Gratitude is recognizing value before you lose it." The words hung between us heavier than they sounded. He didn't respond right away, just wiped his hands on his jeans and took a deep breath. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you really were?" he asked. "You could have had recognition, respect. People would have treated you differently." That's exactly why I said. People listen differently when they think you're rich. They stop hearing the truth. Staying quiet kept me honest. He frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," I said, "when you realize real power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being the same when no one's looking." For a long time, we didn't talk. The fog began to lift from the lake, sunlight slicing through in thin gold lines. Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I keep thinking about the wedding," he said. "The look on everyone's faces. I wanted to disappear." "Good," I said. "Discomfort means the lesson stuck." He turned to me. "You enjoyed it, didn't you, watching me fall?" I shook my head. "No. I hated it. But I hated who you'd become more." He blinked hard, jaw tightening. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For what?" "For everything." "That's too general," I said. "Be specific." He thought for a long moment, then said quietly, "For thinking gratitude meant paying you back. For thinking I was above the people who raised me. For forgetting that you built everything I took for granted." I nodded once. "That's a start." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine from the far bank. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Here," I said. He frowned. "What's this, something you've earned?" Inside was an old photograph, Evan, 10 years old, grinning with grease on his face as we worked on the Chevy together. On the back, I'd written one sentence: "You can't pay back the past. But you can invest in the future." He ran his thumb over the photo. "You really kept this?" "I keep everything that matters," I said. "Even when it forgets me for a while." He looked up, eyes wet but steady. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't a transaction," I said. "You don't earn it. You grow into it." He let out a shaky breath, the kind that comes from something breaking open inside. I reached into my coat again and pulled out my father's old pocket watch. The gold was worn, the glass slightly scratched. I held it out to him. "This isn't a gift," I said. "It's a loan." He stared at it hesitant. "I can't take that." "You can," I said. "But you'll give it back when you learn the difference between inheritance and entitlement." His fingers closed around it carefully, like he was holding time itself. "I'll earn it this time," he said quietly. "Don't earn it for me," I said. "Earn it for whoever you decide to raise better than I did." He smiled through the tears. "You weren't that bad, you know. I was worse than I needed to be," I said. "But sometimes raising a man means letting him break enough to see what he's made of." He turned the watch over, reading the engraving on the back, "For every action, a return." "You really believe that I live by it?" The sun finally broke through the fog, hitting the water like a mirror. We sat there in the light, the silence between us no longer sharp but steady, like a heartbeat, finally sinking after years out of rhythm. After a while, he said, "You think I can fix this? My name, my career, my reputation, maybe," I said. "But don't rebuild the same house. Build something smaller, stronger, something honest." He nodded, clutching the watch in his palm. "I'll try. That's all you ever needed to say." He stood and looked out over the water one last time. "Thank you, Dad." I smiled. That's the first payment that ever mattered. He walked back toward the parking lot, slower this time, shoulders straighter. I stayed on the dock, watching him go. When his figure disappeared beyond the trees, I looked down at the ripples spreading across the lake, each one fading into the next, until the water was calm again. The world had gone quiet, but for once, it felt like peace, not punishment. Rebuilding doesn't start with money. It starts with humility. 3 weeks after that morning on the dock, Evan sent me a photo message. It was a small office above a mechanic's shop in Ballard. Bare walls, a second-hand desk, and a hand-painted sign in the window that read, "Harris Consulting." Underneath it, he'd written, "No marble, no champagne. Just work." I stared at that picture for a long time before replying, "That's a good foundation. Make sure it's level." He didn't ask for help. Not once. Instead, he sent me small updates over the next few weeks. An invoice he'd designed himself, a photo of a client shaking his hand, the first payment receipt pinned to a corkboard. Every image felt like a quiet apology written in effort instead of words. For the first time in years, my son was building something without me as his safety net. I spent most of those days in my workshop by the lake, repairing old furniture and cleaning the tools I'd collected over a lifetime. When you're young, you work to prove something. When you're older, you work to remember why you ever cared. Every screw I tightened, every board I sanded, felt like a conversation with my past one I was finally ready to finish. One morning, Lila called from the bank. "You'll be happy to know your son's accounts are current," she said. "He repaid every outstanding charge. All of it I asked. Every cent," she said. "And he refused my offer to extend new credit." "Good," I said. "Integrity has a better interest rate than cash." She laughed softly. "You're proud, aren't you?" "Quietly," I said. "The best kind of pride." That afternoon, I drove into the city. I parked across from the mechanic's shop and watched through the glass. Evan sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, talking to a middle-aged man in a hard hat. He was taking notes, listening, not performing, not selling, just present. The younger version of him would have dominated the conversation, trying to sound impressive. This one was different. Patient. Intentional. When the meeting ended, he walked the client to the door and shook his hand firmly. The man smiled as he left, patting Evan's shoulder. I stayed in the truck unseen, letting the moment belong entirely to him. For the first time in years, he didn't need me to prove his worth. That realization hit harder than pride. It felt like release. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a call from James Whitman. Michael? He said, I've got a renewable energy project launching next quarter. We're looking for consulting partners. You interested? Appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm retired. James chuckled. Then maybe you'd recommend someone. I hesitated. I know a guy who's starting small. Works out of a shop in Ballard. He paused. Your son? That's right. You trust him with it. I trust lessons more than promises, I said. That following weekend, Evan drove out to the lake. He pulled into the driveway unannounced, wearing a windbreaker and carrying a folder. I think you knew about this, he said, holding up the contract James had sent him. I shrugged. Word travels fast. He smiled. You set me up. I just got out of the way. He handed me a copy of the agreement. It's not much, but it's mine. It's enough, I said. Big things always start that way. He lingered for a while, helping me patch the fence by the dock. We worked side by side, not saying much. Sometimes words only get in the way of understanding. When we finished, he looked at the lake and said, You know, for the first time in my life, I'm not trying to prove anything. I looked at him. Good. That means you're finally free. A week later, I got an email from Lila. Your son's company wired its first payment from the Whitman project on time and verified. No shortcuts, no missed deadlines. I read it twice, then closed the laptop and just sat in the quiet. The system was working, not because I'd built it, but because I'd stopped controlling it. That night, Evan sent another text. We just hired our first employee. She's a single mom with 2 kids. Reminds me of what you used to say, hire for character, train for skill. I typed back, smart move. Keep your payroll clean, your promises cleaner. He sent a thumbs up emoji, an absurd modern thing, but somehow it meant everything. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a local small business conference about legacy and leadership. I almost declined, but Lila convinced me. You've earned the right to say something, she said. And you've learned when not to. At the conference, I stood on stage before a few hundred people, young founders, blue-collar managers, first-generation entrepreneurs. Rebuilding, I said, isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about creating something that failure can't touch. I told them about building systems, not empires. About teaching accountability instead of demanding loyalty. But I didn't mention my son. Some stories don't need to be told out loud to be understood. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, I noticed Evan in the back of the hall. He clapped slowly, smiling. When the room emptied, he walked up and said, You didn't have to hold back. You could have told them. I didn't have to, I said. You're living it. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden box. I've got something for you, he said. Inside was the old pocket watch, cleaned and shining again, ticking softly. It's working perfectly now, he said. I smiled. So are you. He placed it back in my palm, closing my fingers around it. You were right, he said quietly. Gratitude isn't saying thank you, it's showing it. And forgiveness, I asked. He smiled. That's just gratitude with interest. We stood there by the doors as the last of the lights dimmed. Outside, the city glowed in the distance. I slipped the watch into my pocket and said, You've rebuilt well, son. He nodded. You too. As we walked out together, I realized the best kind of legacy isn't passed down. It walks beside you. They say every father leaves something behind, money, a house, a name. But the real legacy isn't what you leave for your children. It's what you leave in them. A year after the wedding that never was, my son didn't just rebuild his business. He rebuilt his character. He stopped chasing applause and started earning trust. And me. I finally understood that silence wasn't the absence of love. It was its most disciplined form. Evan's company had grown slowly, the honest way. He sent me updates sometimes, a new client, a finished project, a thank you letter from a local nonprofit he'd helped. One night he forwarded an email with the subject line, "Recommendation Request, Harris Consulting." Underneath he'd written, "They called me a man of integrity today." That felt better than a raise. I smiled at the message, then closed the laptop. The house was quiet, the lake still. I thought about all the noise it had taken to get here, the shouting, the shame, the lessons dressed as revenge. Growth doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like peace. A few weeks later, the University of Washington invited me to speak at their business school. The dean wrote, "We'd like you to talk about leadership and legacy, how to build something that lasts." I almost said no. Then I thought of my father, and of Evan, and of all the men who'd built empires that meant nothing because they never learned gratitude. I said yes. The auditorium was filled with students, young faces bright, restless. I walked up to the podium with my old pocket watch in hand. "When I was your age," I began, "I thought success was about being seen. Now I know it's about staying the same when no one's watching." They listened closely. Maybe because they didn't expect much from a man with gray hair and a simple suit. I told them about accountability, about quiet strength, about the kind of power that doesn't need a microphone. And though I didn't mention Evan by name, I spoke about him in every sentence. Forgiveness, I said, isn't weakness. It's an investment in peace. And peace, I paused, letting the room go, still pays better dividends than anger ever will. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a few seconds before the applause came. It started slow, then grew. In the back row, I saw a figure stand and clap before anyone else. My son. He didn't look like the man I used to know. He looked like the man I'd hoped he'd become. After the lecture, he waited for me by the stage, smiling. "You didn't tell them everything he said." "They wouldn't have believed it," I said. "Some lessons sound like fiction until life makes them true." He handed me something wrapped in brown paper. "It's a thank you," he said. Inside was a framed photo of us on the dock, coffee cups between us, the lake behind. Below it, he'd engraved 5 words: respect, gratitude, silence, patience, legacy. "It's missing one," I said. He frowned. "Which one?" "Forgiveness," I said. He smiled. I thought that was implied. We walked out together into the crisp evening air. Seattle's skyline shimmered beyond the campus glass and light reflecting off the water. "James Whitman wants me to expand the project," he said. "Sustainability consulting, statewide contracts. I might actually hire a few people." "Hire carefully," I said. "Character over resume." He grinned. I learned from the best. We stopped by the edge of the fountain outside the auditorium. The water rippled with soft light, steady and rhythmic. "Dad," he said quietly, "I never thanked you for any of it." "You did," I said. "Every time you chose the harder path." He nodded, looking down at the reflection of the city lights. "I used to think gratitude was saying thank you. Now I think it's showing up when it matters." "That's all it ever was," I said. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out the pocket watch I'd given him months ago. "I've kept it running," he said, "but I think it's time it came home." I took it from him, feeling the familiar weight. "Keep it," I said. "You're the one still keeping time." He looked like he might argue, then smiled instead. "All right. But I'll take that as permission, not inheritance." "Good," I said. "Permission means you've earned the right to choose what kind of man you'll be next." We walked toward the parking lot, the night air cool and bright. When he reached his car, he turned back. "You think we'll ever stop talking about lessons?" "Probably not," I said. "That's how men like us say I love you." The next morning, I woke to an email from him. No greeting, no signature, just a single sentence: "Gratitude doesn't expire." I read it twice before closing my laptop. That afternoon I sat by the dock, the same place where so many arguments had started and where silence had finally done its healing. I wrote in my journal, "Revenge built the bridge. Gratitude crossed it." The wind was soft, carrying the smell of rain. Somewhere behind me a boat engine started, the sound fading into the distance. As the sun dipped low over the lake, I pulled the watch from my pocket and set it on the railing. The second hand ticked steady and strong, just like it always had. Time doesn't care about apologies. It only rewards correction. I watched the light fade, then whispered into the quiet, "You did good, son." The next day, Evan sent me a photo, his new office full of employees, the company name etched in glass. At the bottom of the message, he'd written, "Your lesson worked, old man." I replied simply, "No, you worked. The lesson just waited." That night I sat by the fire, the watch ticking softly beside me. I thought of my father, of the words he'd once said, "Every system eventually balances." He'd been right. Balance didn't mean winning, it meant peace. If you've ever had to teach someone what gratitude really means, you know it's not about punishment or pride. It's about giving them enough space to find their own reflection and enough silence to hear it. So if you're watching this, tell me, what did gratitude teach you? Because sooner or later life collects what's owed. And the real interest is always in who you become after the fall.